Welcome, this is not a story about shouting, arguing, or begging to be understood. This is a story about silence, the kind that breaks you quietly. They didn't leave with anger. They didn't explain their pain. They simply watched everything they trusted fall apart without making a sound. Some heartbreaks don't need tears. They sit in the chest, heavy and unseen. Smiles become habits. Silence becomes a shield. This is where silent revenge is born. Not in hatred, not in violence, but in walking away without closure. No messages. No explanations. No last words. Because the strongest revenge is becoming someone they can no longer reach, no longer replace, and no longer forget. This is a silent heartbreak story. Listen carefully, because silence has a voice, and tonight it speaks. It always begins quietly, not with shouting or obvious conflict, but with a small shift in behavior that feels easy to ignore at first. A delayed reply, a distant tone, a smile that no longer reaches the eyes. Betrayal in silent heartbreak stories is never loud because real emotional damage rarely announces itself. It grows in the background while trust is still being offered freely. The person who is betrayed keeps believing, keeps giving, keeps choosing loyalty, unaware that the foundation beneath them is already cracking. What makes this kind of betrayal so painful is not just the act itself, but the time invested in something that was slowly slipping away without warning. In silent revenge stories, betrayal is often disguised as normality. Everything looks fine on the surface, conversations continue, routines stay the same. And the world moves forward as if nothing is wrong. Inside, however, something has shifted permanently. The betrayed person begins to notice inconsistencies that cannot be explained away. Promises feel lighter, words lose their weight, affection becomes mechanical, yet instead of confronting the truth immediately, they stay silent, hoping they are wrong. Hoping love or loyalty will return to what it once was. This silence is not weakness, it is confusion mixed with disbelief. When you trust deeply, your mind fights against the idea that someone you valued could be capable of causing such quiet damage. The heart wants proof, not suspicion, so the person waits. They observe, they collect moments instead of accusations. Each moment adds another layer of hurt, but also another layer of clarity. Betrayal cuts quietly because it doesn't shatter everything at once. It removes pieces slowly, leaving the person intact on the outside while hollowing them from within. As realization grows, the pain changes shape. It is no longer sharp. It becomes heavy. There are no dramatic confrontations because the truth no longer needs words. The betrayed person understands that explaining their pain will not restore what was lost. They realize that the betrayal was not a mistake, but a choice repeated in silence. This understanding marks the turning point, not toward anger, but toward emotional withdrawal. The silence deepens. But now it is intentional. In silent heartbreak stories, this is where dignity takes control. Instead of begging for honesty or demanding accountability, the person chooses restraint. They stop asking questions they already know the answers to. They stop reacting. They stop revealing how deeply they were hurt. This quiet response confuses the betrayer more than any argument ever could. There is no fight to win, no defense to prepare, no closure to steal. The absence of reaction becomes the loudest message. Betrayal changes everything because it rewrites how trust is given in the future. The person does not become cold, but they become selective. They learn that loyalty offered blindly is dangerous, and that silence can protect what words cannot. The pain they carry becomes internal discipline. They redirect their energy away from explanations and toward self-preservation. Growth begins without announcement. The most powerful part of this keynote is that betrayal does not destroy the person who is betrayed. It reveals them, it strips away illusions and forces a deeper understanding of self-worth. The silent revenge is not planned, it naturally unfolds as the person moves forward without the one who broke their trust. The betrayer eventually notices the distance, the emotional absence. The life continuing without them at the center. By then, it is too late. The damage was done quietly, and the transformation happened the same way. The deepest pain is not created by words spoken in anger, but by emotions that are never expressed at all, in silent heartbreak stories. The absence of confrontation becomes the most defining feature of the suffering. There are no raised voices, no dramatic accusations, no desperate attempts to prove loyalty. Instead, everything happens internally. The person learns to swallow questions, to silence reactions, and to carry confusion alone. This quiet unraveling is far more exhausting than any argument because it offers no release. Pain without expression has nowhere to go, so it settles into the heart and reshapes it over time. When someone chooses silence over confrontation, it is often misunderstood as acceptance or emotional weakness. In reality, it is a sign of emotional overload. The person is tired of explaining feelings that were repeatedly ignored. They have learned that speaking does not always lead to understanding. In many cases, it leads only to denial, excuses, or temporary apologies that change nothing. Silence becomes a form of self-protection, a way to preserve what little emotional strength remains. By not reacting, they stop feeding a situation that has already proven itself harmful. This kind of silence is heavy because it is filled with unsaid truths. Every quiet moment carries words that were never spoken. Questions like why did you change, when did I stop being enough, and how long have you been pretending echo internally. Yet these questions are never voiced because the person realizes that answers will not bring peace. Some truths, once spoken, only deepen the wound. So they choose restraint, not because they don't care, but because they care too much to engage in emotional chaos. As time passes, the lack of confrontation begins to shift the balance of power. The person who once reacted emotionally now becomes distant and unreadable. They stop seeking reassurance. They stop explaining themselves. This emotional withdrawal creates a silence that feels uncomfortable to those who caused the pain. Without arguments to deflect or emotions to manipulate, the other person is left alone with their actions. The silence forces reflection, something loud confrontations often fail to do internally. The person experiencing heartbreak undergoes a slow transformation. They begin to detach not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Each quiet day strengthens their resolve to protect their peace. They realize that dignity does not require explanations, and closure does not require mutual understanding. Letting go silently becomes an act of self-respect. The heart still hurts, but it no longer begs to be understood. This silent unraveling also reshapes how the person views relationships. They learn that consistency matters more than promises, and actions matter more than apologies. They become more observant, more patient, and less reactive. The emotional energy once spent on confrontation is redirected inward. Healing does not happen loudly. It happens in routines, in discipline, in choosing calm over chaos. The absence of confrontation does not mean the absence of consequences. Silence leaves room for reality to settle in. When the other person finally notices the emotional distance, the change feels sudden to them, but it was built slowly over time. The quiet departure, the lack of explanation, and the refusal to engage become the final statement in silent heartbreak stories. This is where strength reveals itself, not in what was said, but in what was endured and left behind without a sound. Real revenge in silent heartbreak stories is never loud or dramatic. It does not involve proving someone wrong through arguments or seeking validation from others. Instead, it takes shape quietly through inner transformation. The person who was hurt chooses not to react impulsively, not to chase explanations, and not to expose their pain publicly. This decision marks the beginning of a powerful shift. They stop focusing on what was taken from them and start rebuilding what was neglected within themselves. Growth becomes personal, private, and deeply intentional. This transformation often begins with discipline. Pain creates focus. The energy once spent on overthinking conversations, rereading messages, or waiting for closure is redirected into self-improvement. The person develops routines that bring structure back into their life. They work harder, learn more, and invest in their physical and mental strength. This change is not fueled by hatred, but by a desire to regain control. In silence, they rebuild confidence that was slowly eroded by emotional neglect. Unlike public displays of success meant to provoke jealousy, this growth is subtle. There is no announcement. No need to prove anything. The person simply becomes different, more grounded, less reactive. They begin to understand their worth without needing it to be affirmed by someone who failed to recognize it before. This inner stability becomes the foundation of silent revenge. It removes the power others once had over their emotions as transformation deepens. Emotional independence develops. The person no longer measures their value based on attention, affection, or approval. They stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing themselves. This shift is quiet but profound. It changes how they walk away from situations that no longer serve them. They no longer need dramatic exits or final conversations. Their absence speaks clearly enough. The most striking aspect of this silent revenge is its invisibility during the process. While the person is healing, the outside world sees nothing unusual. There are no hints of struggle or ambition. But over time, the results become undeniable. Confidence replaces insecurity. Boundaries replace desperation. Peace replaces chaos. Those who once underestimated them begin to notice the change only when access is no longer available. This is when regret often appears on the other side. Not because the person seeks it, but because transformation highlights what was lost. The silence becomes uncomfortable for those who expected emotional reactions or availability. The absence of explanation forces them to confront their own actions without distraction. By the time they realize the impact of their behavior, the person they hurt is no longer the same. Inner transformation also sharpens awareness. The person learns to recognize patterns they once ignored. They understand that love without respect is not love, and attention without consistency is meaningless. This awareness protects them from repeating the same pain. The revenge is complete not when someone feels regret, but when the cycle ends. Silent revenge is powerful because it heals rather than destroys. It does not rely on external outcomes. Whether the other person ever understands is irrelevant. The victory lies in emotional freedom by choosing growth over reaction. The person reclaims their identity. They move forward without bitterness, carrying lessons instead of wounds. The heartbreak becomes the turning point that led them back to themselves, quietly, deliberately, and permanently. In silent heartbreak stories, the most powerful response is often the one that confuses others the most. When someone expects anger, tears, or endless explanations and receives nothing instead, the silence becomes unsettling. This is where every quiet reaction speaks louder than any argument ever could. The refusal to engage is not indifference, it is a conscious choice to protect dignity. By not reacting, the person removes themselves from emotional games and power struggles that only deepen the pain. Silence in this context is deliberate. It is not avoidance, but control. The person understands that words spoken in emotional moments can be used against them, twisted, or dismissed. They realize that defending their feelings will not make someone care if they already chose not to, so they step back, they listen more and speak less. Their calm presence contrasts sharply with the chaos that once surrounded the relationship. This shift changes the dynamic entirely when explanations stop. Assumptions begin. The other person is left to interpret the silence without guidance. They replay conversations, search for signs, and question their own actions. What once felt predictable becomes uncertain. The absence of emotional reactions removes their sense of control. Silence forces introspection in a way arguments never can. It offers no distractions, no defenses, and no easy escape from accountability. For the person who chooses silence, this path is not easy. It requires emotional restraint and patience. There are moments when speaking feels necessary, when defending oneself seems justified. But each time they choose quiet over reaction, they reinforce their self-respect. They learn that peace is not found in being understood by everyone, but in understanding themselves. This self-awareness becomes a source of strength over time. The silence reshapes how the person is perceived. They are no longer seen as emotionally dependent or reactive. Their composure commands a different kind of respect. People notice the absence of drama, the steadiness, and the emotional boundaries that now exist. This transformation happens without explanation or announcement. It simply becomes evident through behavior. The loudest part of silence is consistency. The person does not return to old patterns. They do not break their quiet to seek validation or closure. This consistency sends a clear message. Access has changed. Emotional availability is no longer unconditional. This shift often triggers delayed reactions from those who once took the person for granted. Confusion turns into concern, and concern turns into regret. What makes this silent response so impactful is that it leaves no room for manipulation. There is nothing to argue with, nothing to deny, and nothing to twist. The silence stands firm, unbothered by attempts to provoke a reaction. It becomes a mirror, reflecting behavior back to the one who caused the pain in the end. Silence becomes a form of emotional authority. It allows the person to exit situations without burning bridges or losing dignity. They do not need to prove their pain to make it real. Their quiet strength speaks through distance, boundaries, and peace. In silent heartbreak stories, this is where power truly shifts. Not through words spoken, but through words intentionally withheld. Pain has a way of reshaping people, especially when it is carried quietly. In silent heartbreak stories, suffering does not explode outward. It settles inward and slowly transforms into strength. What once felt like weakness becomes endurance. The person learns to live with disappointment without allowing it to define them. Each day they wake up, move forward, and carry on, not because the pain is gone, but because they refuse to let it control their future. This quiet perseverance becomes the foundation of a new kind of power at first. The pain feels overwhelming. It seeps into thoughts, routines, and moments of solitude. There is no applause for surviving this stage, no recognition for holding yourself together when everything inside feels broken. But perseverance is built in these unseen moments. Choosing to continue despite emotional exhaustion teaches resilience. The person begins to trust their own strength, realizing they can endure more than they ever imagined. As time passes, pain starts to change its role. It no longer exists only as suffering. It becomes a teacher. It sharpens awareness and deepens emotional intelligence. The person becomes more compassionate, not just toward others, but toward themselves. They learn to set boundaries, to rest without guilt, and to prioritize peace over validation. This growth happens quietly, without the need to prove anything to anyone. Silent perseverance also restores self-worth. When someone survives heartbreak without bitterness, they reclaim control over their narrative. They stop viewing themselves as a victim of circumstances and start seeing themselves as someone who endured and evolved. This shift is subtle but powerful. Confidence returns, not through external praise, but through internal stability. The person no longer needs to be seen to feel secure. One of the most meaningful outcomes of this journey is emotional maturity. The person understands that not all pain needs a response, and not all wounds need to be explained. They learn that healing is not linear, and that setbacks do not erase progress. This patience with oneself creates long-term strength. The heart becomes steadier, less reactive, and more grounded. To those who once caused the pain, this transformation is often invisible until it is complete. They may never witness the nights of struggle or the internal battles fought in silence. What they see later is someone calmer, stronger, and emotionally unavailable in the ways that once felt familiar. This quiet change speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It shows that pain did not destroy, but refined. The power of silent perseverance lies in its integrity. It does not seek revenge, validation, or recognition. It simply continues forward. The person does not carry resentment into their future. They carry lessons. This allows them to build healthier connections and avoid repeating old patterns. The past becomes a reference, not a prison, in the end. Pain turning into power is not about proving resilience to others. It is about knowing, deep within, that heartbreak did not end the story. It redirected it. Through quiet endurance, the person emerges with clarity, strength, and peace. The silence that once held pain now holds wisdom, and that is the truest form of victory. Some stories don't end with apologies, explanations, or second chances. They end with understanding. Silent heartbreak teaches that not every loss needs a reaction, and not every pain needs a voice. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is walk forward carrying their lessons instead of their anger. In silence, wounds heal without being displayed. Strength is built without being announced. The heart learns that dignity is louder than desperation, and peace is greater than revenge. What was once pain becomes clarity, and what was once heartbreak becomes self-respect. This is the quiet victory. Not proving anyone wrong, not making anyone regret, but becoming someone who no longer bleeds over the same wounds. The past remains where it belongs, and the future opens without noise, because the strongest revenge was never destruction. It was healing in silence.